Have you noticed how the most important chapters of life rarely announce their arrival? They do not knock on your door with certainty. They do not arrive carrying proof that everything is about to change. Instead, they often begin with silence, a strange kind of silence that makes you question yourself, a silence that convinces you nothing is happening, while beneath the surface, everything is quietly rearranging itself. Most people fear this season because they judge their lives only by what they can see. If there is no visible progress, they assume there is no progress at all. But the deepest transformations are never visible in the beginning. They begin where the eyes cannot reach. They begin in the hidden landscape of the mind where your old identity slowly loses its grip and something entirely new begins to take shape. You may have been wondering why familiar routines no longer satisfy you. Why conversations that once energized you now leave you feeling strangely empty. Why goals you fought so hard to achieve suddenly seem smaller than they once did. This is not confusion. It is the quiet signal that your inner world is expanding beyond the limits of your previous life. Every meaningful transformation starts with an invisible separation. Before a tree stretches higher into the sky, its roots search deeper into the darkness. From the outside, nothing appears to change, yet everything essential is taking place beneath the surface. Human growth follows the same timeless rhythm. There comes a moment when the unconscious mind begins withdrawing its energy from the personality you have been wearing for years. The roles that once protected you begin to feel too small. The beliefs that once kept you safe no longer bring peace. You cannot return to the old version of yourself, but you have not yet become the person you are meant to be. This space between identities is uncomfortable because it cannot be explained by logic alone. Many people mistake this season for failure. They try to force themselves back into old habits simply because they feel familiar. But familiarity is not always a sign that something belongs in your future. Sometimes it is only evidence that it belonged to your past. Notice what has been happening inside you recently. Perhaps you have become more reflective without intending to. Perhaps memories have resurfaced that you thought were long forgotten. Certain dreams may have become unusually vivid. You may even feel drawn toward books, conversations, or ideas that would never have interested you before. These are not random interruptions. The deeper mind often speaks through symbols before it speaks through certainty. Life rarely transforms us through loud announcements. Instead, it leaves quiet breadcrumbs, a recurring image, a repeated thought, an unexpected conversation that lingers long after it ends, a feeling that refuses to disappear even when you try to ignore it. These subtle experiences are invitations to pay attention. They suggest that something inside you is attempting to establish a new direction before your conscious mind fully understands it. This is why patience becomes more than waiting. Patience becomes participation. Instead of demanding immediate answers, you begin observing what your own inner life is trying to reveal. You stop asking, "Why is nothing happening?" and begin asking, "What is changing within me that I have not yet recognized?" That single question changes everything. Because when your attention turns inward, you discover that transformation is not about becoming someone else. It is about removing everything that prevented your true nature from emerging. The masks begin to crack. The expectations borrowed from others lose their authority. The need to constantly prove yourself starts to fade. This process is rarely comfortable because every genuine beginning asks for an honest ending. The identity built on fear cannot walk into a future built on authenticity. The voice that constantly seeks approval cannot hear the quieter voice of inner wisdom. Before your life changes externally, your relationship with yourself must change internally. There is an ancient pattern woven into every meaningful human journey. Before clarity comes uncertainty. Before confidence comes honest self-confrontation. Before the new chapter begins, the previous one quietly releases its hold. What appears to be emptiness is often preparation. What feels like delay is often careful construction. What feels like losing direction is often the first sign that you are no longer living according to an outdated map. Perhaps that is why this season feels different from every challenge you have faced before. It is not asking you to fight harder. It is asking asking you to see differently, to recognize that your worth has never depended on constant movement, constant achievement, or constant certainty. Sometimes the greatest movement happens in complete stillness. One day, you will look back at this quiet season and realize it was never empty. It was the place where your old story ended before your most beautiful one could begin. If you have begun to feel like you no longer belong in places that once felt like home, do not rush to conclude that something is wrong with you. There is another possibility, one that many people overlook. Perhaps you have not lost yourself at all. Perhaps you have simply outgrown the version of yourself that those places were built to support. Growth is rarely announced with excitement. More often, it arrives as quiet discomfort. It enters your life disguised as restlessness, as questions that refuse to leave your mind, as an invisible distance between who you have been and who you are slowly becoming. You cannot fully explain it, and because you cannot explain it, you may be tempted to ignore it. But the deepest movements of the human soul rarely ask for your permission before they begin. There comes a point in every meaningful transformation when your old identity begins to loosen its grip. The habits that once defined you no longer feel natural. The opinions that once controlled your decisions begin to lose their influence. Even the goals you once believed would complete, you start to feel strangely incomplete. This is not because your dreams were meaningless. It is because they belong to a different stage of your journey. Many people spend years trying to preserve an identity that has already fulfilled its purpose. They continue wearing emotional masks long after those masks have become too heavy to carry. They continue seeking approval from people who only recognize the version of them that no longer exists. They continue repeating familiar patterns because uncertainty feels more frightening than repetition. But ask yourself this: what if the discomfort you feel is not asking you to return to the past? What if it is inviting you to stop pretending? Within every person exists a hidden landscape that is rarely shown to the world. It contains the emotions we pushed aside, the talents we doubted, the fears we refused to acknowledge, and the desires we buried simply because they did not fit the image we believed we had to maintain. This hidden part does not disappear because we ignore it. It waits patiently, quietly, influencing our choices from beneath the surface until we finally become willing to face it. This is why certain situations provoke emotions that seem larger than the moment itself. A simple criticism feels deeply painful. Someone else's success unexpectedly awakens envy. A small disappointment brings overwhelming sadness. These reactions are not random. They are signals pointing toward parts of yourself that have been waiting to be understood rather than condemned. Most people respond by pushing these feelings away. They tell themselves to stay positive, to move on quickly, to silence the discomfort before anyone notices. But what is rejected within does not disappear. It simply finds another way to express itself. It may appear as anxiety without an obvious cause. It may become constant self-doubt. It may create relationships that repeat the same painful patterns over and over again. Real freedom begins the moment you stop fighting every uncomfortable emotion and start listening to what it has been trying to teach you. Imagine carrying a locked room inside your own mind for years. You know it exists, but you avoid opening the door because you fear what you might find. Yet behind that door are not only your fears. Hidden beside them are your courage, your creativity, your compassion, your authenticity, and the parts of yourself that never had the opportunity to grow. The very qualities you have been searching for may be waiting in the places you have spent your life avoiding. Transformation does not happen because you become perfect. It happens because you become honest. Honest enough to admit that you have been afraid. Honest enough to recognize that some of your choices were made to gain acceptance rather than express your true nature. Honest enough to understand that strength is not the absence of vulnerability, but the willingness to face it without turning away. As this honesty grows, something remarkable begins to happen. You no longer feel the need to defend every opinion. You no longer measure your value through comparison. You stop chasing an image of success that was designed by someone else's expectations. Instead, you begin building a life that reflects your own inner reality. This change is subtle at first. Others may not notice it immediately. They may even even wonder why you have become quieter, more thoughtful, or less interested in proving yourself. But inside, a profound shift has already begun. Your energy is no longer invested in maintaining appearances. It is being invested in becoming whole. This is why some relationships naturally change during periods of transformation. It is not always because people become enemies. Sometimes they simply knew the mask better than they knew the person behind it. As the mask falls away, the connection either deepens through authenticity or quietly fades with gratitude for what it once was. Do not fear these changes. Every meaningful chapter asks you to leave behind something that once protected you, but can no longer help you grow. Holding on to an outdated identity may feel safe, but it also keeps you from discovering the life that only your authentic self can experience. Remember, the person who is about to enter the most beautiful chapter of life is never the same person who first dreamed of it. The journey itself changes the dreamer before it changes the destination. As you continue this journey inward, you may begin to notice something unusual. The world itself starts to feel different, even though nothing around you has visibly changed. Certain conversations arrive at exactly the right moment. A forgotten memory suddenly returns with surprising clarity. A symbol appears repeatedly in places where you least expect it. A dream lingers long after you wake, refusing to fade like ordinary dreams do. Most people dismiss these moments as coincidence. They brush them aside because they cannot be measured or explained. Yet the deepest movements of the human mind have never depended on logic alone. There are times when life seems to speak in a language that is quieter than words. It does not shout. It suggests. It does not force. It invites. The difficulty is that we have been trained to pay attention only to what is obvious. We trust facts more than feelings, plans more than intuition, and certainty more than quiet awareness. In doing so, we often overlook the subtle conversation taking place between our conscious mind and the deeper layers of the psyche. Think about the moments that have stayed with you for reasons you cannot explain. Perhaps you met someone who felt strangely familiar, even though you had never seen them before. Perhaps a single sentence from a stranger remained in your thoughts for weeks. Perhaps you kept encountering the same image, the same number, the same story, or the same idea, until it became impossible to ignore. These experiences are not valuable because they predict the future. They are valuable because they reveal what your inner world is ready to notice. The mind has a remarkable way of recognizing meaning before it can fully explain it. Long before your conscious thoughts organize themselves into certainty, another part of you has already begun making connections. It gathers experiences, memories, emotions, and symbols, weaving them together into a pattern that slowly becomes visible over time. What feels like coincidence is often the moment when your inner awareness and outer experience briefly mirror one another. This is why transformation often begins with curiosity rather than confidence. Instead of asking, "What does this guarantee?" ask, "What is this inviting me to understand?" That question opens a completely different way of seeing life. Suddenly, you are no longer searching for magical signs that promise success. Instead, you begin observing your own responses. Why did that conversation move you so deeply? Why did that dream awaken emotions you had not felt in years? Why does a certain path continue calling your attention, even when logic encourages you to ignore it? The answers are rarely found outside you. They emerge through honest observation. Clears throat. Dreams, for example, are not simply random images created by a sleeping brain. They often speak through symbols, because symbols reach places that ordinary language cannot. A mountain may represent a challenge that asks you to grow. A river may reflect the movement of your emotional life. A house may reveal different aspects of your own personality, with each room representing something you have explored or neglected. The meaning is never universal because every symbol passes through the unique landscape of your own experience. This is why comparing your inner journey with someone else's can become a distraction. What carries profound meaning for one person may be completely ordinary for another. The purpose is not to copy someone else's interpretation. The purpose is to become fluent in the language of your own inner world. As you practice this kind of attention, another change quietly begins. You stop reacting automatically to everything that happens around you. Instead of asking why life is happening to you, you begin asking what life is revealing through you. This shift may seem small, but it changes the entire direction of your growth. Even painful experiences begin to take on new meaning. A disappointment is no longer just a setback. It becomes a mirror reflecting an expectation you never questioned. Conflict is no longer simply about another person's behavior. It reveals something within yourself that is asking to be understood. Moments of joy are no longer accidents. They become clues pointing toward what genuinely aligns with your deeper nature. Notice how different this approach feels from constantly searching for external validation. When you depend entirely on the outside world to tell you who you are, every opinion becomes powerful enough to shape your identity. But when you begin listening to the quieter wisdom within, something extraordinary happens. You become less reactive and more reflective, less driven by fear and more guided by meaning. This does not mean every coincidence carries a hidden message or every dream predicts the future. The deeper lesson is far more grounded than that. It is learning to cultivate awareness, to slow down enough that your own life can reveal patterns you were too distracted to notice before. Meaning is rarely hidden because life wants to keep it from you. More often it remains unseen because the mind is too busy looking somewhere else. And perhaps this is why the most beautiful chapter of your life has remained invisible until now. Not because it was absent, but because it first needed you to develop the eyes to recognize it. The signs were never trying to lead you away from yourself. They were quietly leading you back to who you have always been. There is a moment in every profound transformation when the greatest battle is no longer with the world, it is with yourself. Not because you are broken, and not because you have taken the wrong path, but because two versions of you can no longer live in the same space. One belongs to the life you have already known. The other belongs to a future that is quietly calling your name. The tension you feel is not evidence that you are failing. It is evidence that something within you refuses to remain asleep. Most people spend their lives trying to avoid inner conflict. They believe peace comes from eliminating doubt, silencing fear, and escaping uncertainty. But this pursuit often creates the opposite result. The emotions we refuse to face do not disappear. They simply become invisible forces directing our decisions from behind the curtain. What remains unconscious eventually shapes the life we consciously create. Think about how often fear disguises itself as reason. It tells you that now is not the right time. It convinces you to stay where everything is familiar. It presents comfort as wisdom and hesitations as responsibility. Yet, if you observe carefully, you will notice that many of your greatest regrets were not created by failure. They were created by the quiet surrender to fear that seemed sensible in the moment. This is why your deepest struggle is rarely against circumstances. It is against the unseen beliefs you accepted without questioning them. Some of those beliefs were inherited long before you were capable of choosing them. They came from childhood experiences, from the expectations of family, from the values of society, from moments of rejection that quietly taught you to become smaller in order to feel accepted. Over time, these beliefs became so familiar that they began to feel like facts. You stopped asking whether they were true because they had become part of the way you saw yourself. But every meaningful transformation begins with a simple realization. Not every thought deserves your trust. The voice that constantly whispers, "You are not enough," is not necessarily telling the truth. The part of you that believes you must earn your worth through endless achievement is not your deepest identity. Clears throat. The fear that insists you will lose everything. If you become your authentic self is often protecting a version of you that no longer needs protection. This is where the real work begins. Instead of running from these inner voices, you learn to sit with them. You become curious rather than defensive. You ask where they came from. You ask what they have been trying to protect. And slowly, something remarkable happens. What once appeared to be an enemy begins to reveal itself as an unfinished story, asking for understanding. Every hidden fear carries a message beneath its surface. Fear of rejection may conceal a longing to be genuinely seen. Fear of failure may hide a desire to live with purpose rather than perfection. Fear of change may simply reflect the grief of leaving behind an identity that once kept you safe. When you recognize this, your relationship with yourself begins to change. You stop dividing your inner world into good and bad parts. You stop celebrating only your strengths while condemning your weaknesses. Instead, you begin the quiet work of integration. You understand that wholeness is not achieved by removing the darker parts of your personality. It is achieved by bringing them into awareness so they no longer control you from the shadows. This process asks for courage unlike any other. It is easier to blame circumstances than to examine your own patterns. It is easier to criticize others than to question the assumptions shaping your own reactions. It is easier to keep moving than to become still enough to hear what your inner life has been trying to say for years. Yet every time you choose honesty over avoidance, another piece of your authentic self returns. You begin noticing changes that no one else can measure. You react less impulsively. You forgive more naturally, not because the past suddenly becomes acceptable, but because it no longer defines your future. You become less interested in winning every argument and more interested in understanding the truth beneath it. Your confidence becomes quieter because it no longer depends on constant approval. This is the strength that lasts, not the strength that pretends never to feel pain, not the strength that hides behind perfection, but the strength that can stand face to face with uncertainty and remain open instead of closing down. There is an ancient pattern found in nearly every meaningful story ever told. Before the hero reaches wisdom, there is a descent. Before renewal comes confrontation. Before the new life begins, the old identity must pass through a place where certainty no longer exists. This pattern continues to appear because it reflects something timeless within the human experience. Growth does not happen by avoiding the unknown. Growth happens by walking through it consciously. Perhaps this is why your current struggle feels so different. It is not asking you to become stronger by resisting life. It is inviting you to become stronger by understanding yourself. And when understanding replaces fear, the conflict that once felt like your greatest burden quietly becomes the very foundation of your greatest strength. For the life waiting ahead does not require a perfect person. It requires a whole one. There is one final illusion that quietly holds many people back, even after they have begun to understand themselves. It is the belief that before taking the next step, they must first eliminate every uncertainty. They wait for complete confidence. They wait for every answer to appear. They wait for a future that feels guaranteed before allowing themselves to move toward it. But life has never unfolded that way. The most meaningful chapters are never revealed all at once. They emerge one step at a time, asking you to trust what you have become rather than demanding proof of everything that lies ahead. The desire for certainty is understandable. It promises safety. It offers the comfort of control, yet beneath that desire often lives a quieter fear. The fear that if the future cannot be predicted, then perhaps it cannot be trusted. Look closely at your own journey. Were the moments that shaped you ever fully planned? The friendships that transformed your life? The unexpected opportunities that redirected your path? The lessons hidden inside disappointment? Very few of them arrived according to your schedule. They entered quietly, often disguised as inconvenience, confusion, or even loss. Only later did you recognize their purpose. This is one of the great paradoxes of inner transformation. The deeper you grow, the less you need life to explain itself in advance. Not because you become careless, but because you begin to recognize a pattern. Again and again, your greatest growth has come from experiences you never would have chosen, yet would never wish to erase. The mind looks backward and discovers meaning that was invisible while the journey was unfolding. Why then do we insist that the future must reveal itself before we are willing to trust it? Perhaps because certainty feels like protection. But certainty can also become a prison. It encourages you to repeat only what is familiar. It limits your imagination to what your current identity already understands. It keeps you walking the same roads simply because they have names you recognize. The life that is waiting for you cannot be reached by repeating who you have always been. It asks for something different. It asks for openness. Openness to possibilities that cannot yet be measured. Openness to encounters that cannot be scheduled. Openness to discovering strengths that only appear when the old guarantees disappear. Notice how nature itself moves. A seed does not demand to see the entire tree before it begins to grow. A river does not refuse to flow because it cannot predict every turn ahead. Dawn never waits until every shadow has disappeared before it begins to brighten the sky. Growth has always trusted movement more than certainty. Human transformation follows the same rhythm. The deeper mind does not reveal your entire path, because if it did, you might try to control it instead of living it. You would become attached to expectations instead of remaining present to what each moment is trying to teach you. Sometimes the hidden path is an act of wisdom rather than mystery. This is why surrender is so often misunderstood. Many imagine surrender means giving up. They believe it is passive, weak, or resigned. But true surrender is none of these things. It is the courage to release the illusion that you must control every outcome before taking meaningful action. It is choosing participation over prediction. When you stop trying to force life into your preferred timeline, something remarkable happens. Your attention returns to the present. You begin noticing opportunities that anxiety had hidden from your view. You hear conversations differently. You recognize possibilities that fear once dismissed. You become available for experiences that your rigid expectations would have overlooked. This quiet openness changes the way coincidence appears in your life. Moments that once seemed ordinary suddenly carry unexpected meaning. A single conversation encourages a decision you have postponed for years. An old interest returns with new significance. A chance encounter awakens a forgotten part of yourself. None of these moments control your destiny, but together they create a pattern that gently guides your attention toward what truly matters. The more you observe this process, the less desperate you become for certainty. Instead of asking, "Will everything work out exactly as I hope?" you begin asking, "Who am I becoming through this experience?" That question is far more powerful because it cannot be taken away by changing circumstances. A person who depends entirely on predictable outcomes will always live with hidden anxiety because life itself cannot be controlled. But a person who trusts the growth taking place within will carry a quiet confidence into every season, even when the future remains unclear. This confidence is not loud. It does not need to convince anyone. It is born from experience. It remembers every challenge that once seemed impossible, but eventually became part of your strength. It remembers every ending that quietly prepared a better beginning. And it remembers that the deepest wisdom has never come from knowing everything in advance. It has come from discovering that you were capable of walking forward, even when you knew very little. Perhaps that is what this beautiful new chapter has been waiting for all along. Not for the moment when every question disappears, but for the moment when you no longer need every answer before you choose to live fully. Because the most extraordinary life is not found at the end of certainty. It begins the moment you are willing to walk beyond it. As you stand at the edge of this reflection, there is one truth that deserves to be remembered above all others. The most beautiful chapter of your life will not feel entirely unfamiliar in a quiet and deeply personal way. It will feel as though you have been moving toward it for much longer than you realized. Not because every detail was planned, and not because your future was fixed from the beginning, but because every meaningful experience has been shaping the person capable of living it. Think back to the moments you once wished had never happened, the disappointments that seemed impossible to understand, the relationships that ended before you were ready, the dreams that collapsed despite your greatest effort, the seasons when silence felt louder than any answer. At the time, each experience appeared isolated, disconnected from everything else. You searched for explanations that never came, You asked why the path had become so difficult. You wondered whether you had taken a wrong turn somewhere along the way. Yet now, after walking through this journey together, another possibility begins to emerge. What if those experiences were never separate? What if they were chapters of the same story? Human beings naturally search for meaning. We are not satisfied with events alone. We instinctively try to understand how one moment connects with another. Sometimes those connections become visible only after years have passed. A conversation you almost forgot suddenly explains a decision you make today. A failure you once resented quietly becomes the reason you developed resilience. An unexpected meeting opens a door that would have remained invisible had your original plan succeeded. Life has an extraordinary way of weaving meaning from experiences that once appeared unrelated. This is why the deepest transformations often feel strangely familiar when they finally arrive. They do not create a completely new person. They reveal the person who has been patiently emerging beneath years of fear, expectation, and self-doubt. You may remember how earlier we spoke about the quiet season that prepares the soul before visible change appears. We explored the hidden parts of yourself that ask to be acknowledged instead of ignored. We learned to observe the symbols, dreams, emotions, and meaningful patterns that quietly reflected your inner world. We discovered that conflict was not your enemy, but your teacher. And finally, we recognized that certainty is not the doorway to transformation. Trust is. Now all of these threads begin to come together. None of them were separate lessons. They were different expressions of the same journey. Every challenge invited you to know yourself more deeply. Every uncomfortable emotion invited greater honesty. Every meaningful coincidence invited greater awareness. Every ending invited greater freedom. Without realizing it, you have not simply been waiting for a better life. You have been becoming the person capable of recognizing it. This changes everything because it means the future is not something that suddenly rescues you from your past. Instead, the future quietly grows out of everything you have learned to understand within yourself. Outer change becomes sustainable only when inner transformation has already begun. This is why chasing constant excitement rarely creates lasting fulfillment. Excitement fades, novelty disappears, but self-understanding continues expanding throughout your entire life. Every layer you uncover reveals another layer waiting beneath it. Growth is not a destination you eventually reach. It is a relationship you develop with your own unfolding nature. Perhaps that is the greatest freedom available to any human being. To stop asking whether life is happening for or against you. To stop measuring every season by immediate success or failure. To stop believing that delays automatically mean denial, or that hardship automatically means you have lost your way. Instead, you begin seeing each experience as part of a larger pattern that your conscious mind can only appreciate over time. This perspective does not remove pain. It gives pain direction. It does not erase uncertainty. It gives uncertainty meaning. And when meaning enters suffering, suffering loses much of its power to define you. There will still be days when questions remain unanswered. There will still be moments when fear quietly returns. There will still be unexpected endings, unfamiliar beginnings, and seasons that ask for more patience than you believe you possess. But now you carry something different into those moments. You carry awareness. You know that your inner world deserves as much attention as your outer achievements. You know that authenticity is stronger than appearance. You know that the hidden parts of yourself are not obstacles but invitations to become whole. You know that meaning often reveals itself only after faithful observation. And perhaps most importantly, you know that the person you are becoming is far more important than the circumstances you are trying to control. One day, perhaps sooner than you expect, you will look back at this very season. You will remember the uncertainty that once kept you awake. You will remember the questions that seemed impossible to answer. You will remember wondering whether anything meaningful was happening at all. Then you will smile not because every problem disappeared, not because life suddenly became perfect, but because you finally recognized that the most beautiful chapter did not begin when the world around you changed. It began the moment you began changing your relationship with yourself. And that is why the chapter ahead will feel both new and deeply familiar. It is not taking you somewhere you were never meant to be. It is returning you to the truest version of who you have been becoming all along. Walk forward with quiet courage because the most beautiful chapter of your life has already begun.